It's 11:47 p.m. You see flashing lights in your rearview mirror. Your heart rate jumps before your brain even catches up. You replay the last hour in your head. 1 drink, maybe 2. You feel fine. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is what you say and what you agree to in the next 5 minutes. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If you were pulled over tonight after having a couple of drinks, would you agree to a field sobriety test on the side of the road? Drop your answer below. Seriously, because most people think they know what they would do, but when the lights are flashing and an officer is standing at their window asking questions, decisions get emotional fast, and by the time you realize what those decisions actually mean, the case is already building. I've spent years studying DUI enforcement, roadside procedures, airport interdiction patterns, and the science behind alcohol testing devices. I've also watched countless travelers make small, well-intentioned mistakes that turned manageable situations into life-changing charges. What I'm going to walk you through isn't theory. It's how these stops actually unfold, how officers are trained to think, and where people unknowingly hurt themselves. Let's start with something that surprises almost everyone. Field sobriety tests are not designed for you to pass. They are designed to collect evidence. When an officer asks you to step out of the car and perform a field sobriety test, you are entering a subjective evaluation process. The walk and turn, the one-leg stand, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, where they follow your eyes with a penlight. These tests were standardized decades ago, and officers are trained to look for specific clues of impairment. Miss a heel-to-toe step, raise your arms slightly for balance, start too soon, sway a little. Each of those becomes a documented clue. Here's what most drivers don't understand. These tests assume a baseline level of coordination under ideal conditions. Flat surface, proper lighting, no medical issues, no anxiety, no uneven pavement, no fatigue from a long travel day, no dress shoes on gravel. But real life doesn't happen in ideal conditions. You might be on the shoulder of a highway with cars flying past at 70 miles per hour. Your adrenaline is high. You may have back problems, knee injuries, or simply poor balance even when sober. Yet if you show 2 or more clues on certain tests, that's often enough for probable cause to arrest. Now here's the critical piece. In most states, field sobriety tests are voluntary. That doesn't mean there are no consequences to refusing, but it does mean you are generally not legally required to perform balancing exercises on the side of the road. When people ask me why someone should refuse a field sobriety test, the answer is simple. Because you are giving the officer additional subjective evidence to use against you. If the officer already smells alcohol and observes red eyes or slurred speech, the stop is already trending toward investigation. Performing poorly on a field sobriety test almost never helps you. Performing well does not guarantee release. I've reviewed cases where drivers completed the tests reasonably well, yet were arrested anyway because the officer believed other indicators showed impairment. The footage later became evidence in court. So when someone says, "Why would I refuse if I'm sober?" my response is this. The test is not about proving innocence. It's about building a case. That brings us to the next fork in the road. Breathalyzer versus blood test. Which one should you take? This is where things become more technical, and where travelers especially get confused. At the roadside, and you may be offered a preliminary breath test. That handheld device is often used to establish probable cause. In many states, that roadside device is separate from the official chemical test administered after arrest. Once you are arrested for DUI, implied consent laws kick in. When you obtained your driver's license, you implicitly agreed to submit to chemical testing if lawfully arrested for DUI. Refusal at this stage usually triggers automatic license suspension, sometimes for a year or more, regardless of whether you are ultimately convicted. Now we're in strategic territory. Breath tests measure alcohol concentration in deep lung air and estimate blood alcohol content. They are fast, non-invasive, and widely used, but they are not perfect. They rely on proper calibration, correct observation periods, and the assumption that breath alcohol correlates accurately with blood alcohol. Certain medical conditions like acid reflux, diabetes, or even recent mouth alcohol exposure can skew results. Improper observation before testing can contaminate readings. Machines require maintenance and calibration logs. Blood tests, on the other hand, directly measure alcohol concentration in the bloodstream. They are generally considered more accurate, but they introduce timing issues. Alcohol levels rise and fall. If significant time passes between driving and blood draw, the result may not reflect the level at the time of operation. Here's where officers think strategically. If someone is clearly impaired, they may prefer breath because it's quick. If drugs are suspected, blood is often necessary because breathalyzers do not detect most drugs. If you refuse a chemical test after arrest, the consequences can be severe. Immediate administrative license suspension. Potential use of refusal as evidence in court. In some states, refusal itself can be charged separately. You might see. People often think refusing means the state has no evidence. That's rarely true. Officers rely on driving behavior, body camera footage, statements made during the stop, and field sobriety observations. And that leads to one of the most important moments in any DUI stop. The question that sounds harmless but is loaded with consequence. Have you been drinking tonight? It's conversational, casual, almost friendly. But your answer matters enormously. If you say yes and admit to a specific number of drinks, you've provided an admission that will appear in the police report. If you say no, and the officer later claims to smell alcohol or obtains a positive test result, your credibility takes a hit. The best legal response is calm, respectful, and non-incriminating. Something along the lines of, "I prefer not to answer any questions." That's not rude. That's asserting your right to remain silent. Tone matters. Aggression escalates. Silence delivered calmly preserves your position. Now let's talk about DUI checkpoints, because this is where constitutional debates come alive. Are they constitutional? The short answer is yes, under specific guidelines. The Supreme Court has upheld properly conducted sobriety checkpoints as constitutional if they follow neutral criteria, minimize officer discretion, and serve public safety interests. But that doesn't mean anything goes. Checkpoints must follow predetermined patterns. Every third car, every fifth car. Supervisory oversight, visible signage, limited questioning. If officers deviate from those neutral guidelines, constitutional challenges may arise. At a checkpoint, you still retain rights. You must provide license and registration when required, but you are not obligated to answer investigative questions beyond identification. If directed into secondary screening based on observable signs, the same rules about field sobriety and chemical testing apply. Now here's something travellers overlook. If you're near an airport, especially in a high-traffic corridor late at night, DUI enforcement is aggressive. Officers know travellers are under time pressure. That pressure leads to poor decisions. I've seen people rush to make flights, drive after drinking at airport lounges, and assume short distances mean low risk. Airports are heavily monitored zones. Surveillance, patrol units, and overlapping jurisdictions make enforcement efficient. Let's shift to something many people don't consider until it's too late. Prescription medications. Can you be arrested for taking medication prescribed by your doctor? Absolutely. DUI is not limited to alcohol. Impairment is the key. If a prescribed medication affects your ability to drive safely, you can be charged even if you took it exactly as directed. Officers look for driving patterns, lane drifting, slow response times, incoherent speech. They don't care whether the substance was legal, they care whether it impaired you, and this becomes even more complicated with marijuana. In states where marijuana is legal, people assume DUI laws don't apply. They do. There is no universally accepted roadside marijuana equivalent to a breathalyzer. Officers rely on drug recognition experts, field observations, and sometimes blood tests measuring THC levels. But THC metabolizes differently from alcohol. Levels do not correlate cleanly with impairment timing. This creates legal battlegrounds in court, but it doesn't prevent arrest on the roadside. Now imagine another scenario. You decide not to drive. You sleep in your car in a parking lot because you think you're being responsible. Can you still get a DUI? In many jurisdictions, yes, if you are in actual physical control of the vehicle while intoxicated. That phrase is broader than people realize. Keys in the ignition, engine running, even keys within reach in some states. Officers assess whether you had the ability to operate the vehicle. If the engine is off, you're in the back seat, and the keys are not accessible, your position is stronger. But there are no universal guarantees, and that brings us to fighting a DUI charge in court. Every case hinges on details. Was the stop lawful? Was there reasonable suspicion? Were field sobriety tests administered correctly? Was the breath machine calibrated? Was the observation period honoured? Were implied consent warnings properly given? Challenging probable cause can suppress evidence. Challenging machine maintenance records can undermine breath results. Cross-examining officers on inconsistencies can weaken credibility. But here's the reality. I tell people bluntly, the best DUI defence begins before the arrest, with smart roadside decisions. Don't volunteer statements. Don't perform voluntary tests casually. Don't assume politeness requires self-incrimination. Don't confuse cooperation with confession. Now let's pivot briefly to something viral because it ties directly into mindset. Sovereign citizen arguments during DUI stops. I've watched videos where drivers facing DUI investigations attempt to refuse jurisdiction, quote misunderstood constitutional phrases, or declare they are not subject to state law. It never ends well. DUI enforcement is statutory. Courts consistently reject pseudo-legal defences. Arguing roadside about gold fringe flags or maritime law does not invalidate a breath test. If anything, erratic legal arguments may reinforce an officer's perception of impairment. The smartest move during a DUI stop is strategic restraint. Provide required identification. Decline voluntary tests if you choose. Avoid statements. Request an attorney when appropriate. And understand this clearly. Every word is recorded. Body cameras, dash cameras, sometimes bystanders' phones. You are building your own case in real time. Alcohol-related stops generate high search volume online because people are scared. They should be. A DUI conviction can mean license suspension, fines, increased insurance premiums, ignition interlock devices, travel complications, and professional consequences. But fear should not produce panic. It should produce informed decisions. If you've made it this far, you already know more than most drivers on the road tonight. And the next time you see flashing lights in your mirror, the goal isn't to win an argument. It's to protect your future with calm, controlled choices that hold up long after the roadside conversation ends.